the pause that shook the nation. The silence was heavier than thunder. Millions of people across India were sitting in front of their televisions, radios, and glowing phone screens, listening to the Prime Minister speak. It was one of those evenings when the entire country seemed to hold its breath because everyone expected an important announcement. The speech had begun in the usual way, with firm words about progress, vision, and unity. But then, without warning, the Prime Minister paused. Not the small pause of someone catching breath. Not the casual hesitation of a leader choosing words carefully. No, this was something else. A long silence, deliberate and unsettling. The camera showed his eyes narrowing, as if his thoughts had been struck by lightning. The whole nation leaned forward, restless, wondering what had just crossed his mind. Then came the words. Quiet, almost soft, but filled with weight. He asked, in front of millions, a question that no one had expected. It was not about policy or politics. It was not about defense, economy, or even elections. It was about a woman, living far from the flashing lights of Delhi in a modest home carrying stories most people did not know. Lakshmi Pichai, he said, tell me, how did you raise a son like Sundar? For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to freeze. Streets where children were chasing each other fell into silence. Train stations, noisy markets, and offices with buzzing fans all went quiet. Every head turned to the nearest screen, every ear pressed closer to the nearest radio. The Prime Minister of India, a man known for never letting silence dominate his speeches, had just paused the entire nation, not for politics but for a mother's story. But to understand why that question mattered, and why it was asked at all, one has to go back in time, far from the grand buildings of Delhi, back to the narrow lanes of Chennai, where a small boy grew up counting minutes, cherishing kindness, and learning the weight of humility. This is where the journey of Sundar Pichai began. Life in Chennai in the 1970s was not the glittering India seen in films. It was ordinary, filled with dust, sweat, and the fragrance of food cooking in small kitchens. Sundar's home was modest, almost bare. The walls were plain, painted in faded colors, the floor cooled by cement that carried the scent of dampness after monsoon rains. There was no luxury, no air conditioning, not even a phone in those early years. Yet inside those walls was something richer than wealth, a quiet dignity, a sense of values that would shape a boy into a man who one day would lead one of the largest companies in the world. Sundar's father, Ragunatha Pichai, worked as an electrical engineer for a British company. He was intelligent, disciplined, and hard-working, but his salary was small and every rupee had to be stretched like fabric pulled too tight. His mother, Lakshmi, had studied stenography, but gave up her career to take care of her children. She was gentle yet strong, carrying her sacrifices like invisible ornaments. She believed that love and discipline were not separate things. They lived together in a small apartment, not large enough to offer privacy, but big enough to contain dreams. Young, Sundar was curious. He had a pair of wide, observing eyes that seemed to hold questions no one else thought to ask. He noticed everything. The way his father's shoes wore thin at the heel, the way his mother measured rice carefully so nothing was wasted, the way neighbors helped each other during power cuts. He was quiet, not the kind of boy to shout or demand attention. But silence does not mean emptiness. Silence for him was a space where ideas grew. Every day, Sundar and his brother would walk to school. The path was dusty and their sandals wore out quickly, leaving their toes smudged with earth. The classrooms were crowded, the blackboards chipped, the chalk often breaking in the teacher's hand. Yet Sundar loved school. Numbers and patterns fascinated him. He could remember telephone numbers easily, even though his family did not yet own a phone. Friends and neighbors would often be surprised when Sundar could recall their relatives' phone numbers just by hearing them once. What others saw as a small trick was, for Sundar, a joy. The joy of memory, of connection, of seeing how the world fit together like pieces of a puzzle. But home was where his real lessons began. Ragunatha believed in discipline. He often sat with Sundar at night, explaining the world of machines, circuits, and switches. Sometimes the electricity would fail, and the family would sit in the dark, waiting for the fan to stir again. Sundar learned in those moments that life was fragile, that comfort could vanish in seconds. But he also learned resilience. He watched his father fix things with steady hands and endless patience. Lakshmi, on the other hand, taught him humility. She would share stories not of kings or heroes but of neighbors who quietly helped each other, of people who gave without expecting recognition. She reminded Sundar that respect was not earned by wealth, but by how one treated others. She told him that the greatest strength a person could carry was kindness. Still, life was not easy. Sundar's family did not own a car. Most journeys were taken by crowded buses where passengers leaned against each other, holding onto the metal bars overhead. When Sundar dreamed of something bigger, like studying abroad, it felt distant, almost impossible. Money was always short. Sometimes the choice had to be made between buying new clothes and paying for school books, and yet Sundar never complained. Instead, he learned the art of patience, the courage to endure, and the ability to dream quietly without burdening his parents. It was during one of those simple evenings, when the family sat together eating dinner on steel plates, that Sundar asked his mother why she had given up her job. Her answer stayed with him forever. She said, "Because my children's dreams are bigger than mine." It was not said with sadness. It was said with pride, with love, with a certainty that sacrifice was not loss but an investment. Sundar never forgot those words. As he grew, Sundar's talents became more visible. He excelled in school, and teachers began to notice his discipline and sharp mind. But not everyone understood him. Some classmates teased him for his quiet nature, calling him dull, while others mocked his family's simple lifestyle. Sundar carried these wounds silently, never fighting back with anger. Instead, he stored those experiences deep within, as fuel for the journey ahead. The turning point came one afternoon when his father brought home a rotary phone, second-hand and slightly scratched. But to Sundar it was like a treasure chest. He marveled at the way numbers clicked into place when the dial spun. He remembered every number he dialed, not once forgetting. What seemed ordinary to others was magic to him. He could sense patterns, connections, invisible threads tying people together through wires. Little did he know that this fascination would one day lead him to design tools that billions of people would use to connect across the world. Meanwhile, the nation around him was changing. India in those days was a country of contrasts, poverty and progress walking side by side, tradition and modernity clashing at every corner. Political speeches filled radios, cricket matches filled hearts, and cinema filled dreams. But for families like Sundar's, survival came first, ambition second, and yet ambition could not be silenced. It grew quietly in Sundar, like a flame hidden in the wind. Years later, when he would sit across powerful leaders and make decisions that shaped technology, he would still think of those days in Chennai. The nights when he studied by the faint light of a lamp. The mornings when his mother reminded him to stay humble no matter how high he climbed. The afternoons when his father's quiet strength taught him that problems were not walls but doors waiting to be opened with patience. And so, when the Prime Minister paused the nation and asked Lakshmi Pichai that single question, it was not just about one mother or one son. It was about the hidden story of countless families in India, families that gave everything they had so that their children could dream bigger. But what did Lakshmi answer? How did she describe the journey of raising Sundar, of watching him leave a small apartment in Chennai to sit in boardrooms of Silicon Valley? The nation leaned forward, breathless, waiting to hear her voice. And just before she opened her mouth to answer, the screen went black. The boy who counted minutes. The screen had gone black, but the silence it left was louder than any sound. Across India, millions of people were whispering the same question. What would Lakshmi Pichai say? What secret of motherhood, what hidden story of sacrifice was so important that the Prime Minister himself had paused his speech? But answers never come quickly, not when they matter most. To understand that moment, one must step into the dusty classrooms and narrow lanes where Sundar Pichai grew into the boy who counted minutes, the boy who learned that life was measured, not only by years but by sacrifices invisible to the world. Sundar's school days were not like the stories often told in glossy magazines about successful people. There were no shining shoes, no polished cars dropping him at the gate. He walked with his brother under the hot Chennai sun, carrying a bag that was often heavier than his shoulders liked. The streets were alive with noise, rickshaw bells, bicycle horns, vendors calling out the price of bananas and tamarind. Yet inside Sundar's head, there was quiet calculation. He counted the steps to school, the minutes until the bell, the seconds it took to solve problems in his mind. His teachers noticed his unusual memory. Once, when a guest entered the classroom, Sundar was asked to recall a long series of numbers written earlier on the board. Without hesitation, he spoke them back perfectly. The class gasped, and the teacher smiled with pride, but not all classmates admired him. Some whispered behind his back, calling him strange, a boy who lived in numbers instead of laughter. Sundar heard the whispers, but never let them break him. He had learned early from his mother that silence could be stronger than words, but what people did not see was the struggle behind those numbers. Sundar often studied by the dim glow of a kerosene lamp when the electricity cut off for hours. The fan would stop, the room would grow heavy with heat, and mosquitoes would buzz endlessly. His father would sometimes bring out a candle, placing it carefully so Sundar could keep reading. Lakshmi, tired from a day of cooking and cleaning, would sit nearby, sewing clothes or repairing something, her eyes quietly watching her son. She believed that in those late hours when the world slept, her son was building his future brick by brick. The family's financial struggles were constant. Every decision was weighed carefully. Should they buy new sandals for the children, or save that money for school books? Should they fix the leaking roof or keep the money aside for examination fees? Often, Lakshmi chose sacrifice. She wore the same faded sari many times, stitching it at the corners when it tore, so that her sons could have what they needed. One day Sundar noticed his mother skipping her meal, pretending she was not hungry. He was still young but old enough to understand. He asked her softly why she wasn't eating. She smiled and said, "I am full, Sundar." But he saw the truth in her tired eyes. That evening, he realized that success is never built alone. It is carried on the quiet shoulders of those who give up their own comfort so others may rise. In school, Sundar's fascination with patterns grew. He was not only interested in mathematics but also in the hidden rhythm of life itself. He could look at a calendar and instantly tell which day of the week a certain date would fall on. He could hear a series of numbers once and store them as if they were etched into his mind. His friends began to test him, throwing out random numbers only to be amazed when he recalled them perfectly days later. But talent often walks hand in hand with doubt. Sundar sometimes wondered if his gifts mattered in a world where money and connections seemed more powerful than memory. He watched other children with wealthier families, wearing polished shoes, eating snacks he could not afford, speaking of vacations he had never taken. For a brief time he felt small, as if his dreams were foolish. His father noticed the shadow of doubt in him. One evening, Ragunatha took Sundar to his small workplace, a factory filled with machines and wires. He showed him how he repaired broken parts, how he kept things running even when resources were limited. "See, Sundar," his father said, "you don't need the best tools to solve problems. You need patience and you need to think differently. Remember that." Those words sank deep into Sundar's heart. His mother added her own wisdom. One night, as he studied, she said, "Never compare yourself with others. Respect comes not from what you wear or what you own, but from how you treat people." Sundar nodded, but the truth of those words would only shine years later, when he stood among powerful men and women in boardrooms where kindness was rare. Yet life was not only lessons and sacrifice. There were small joys too. Sundar loved cricket, like millions of other Indian boys. He would play in the narrow lanes, using makeshift bats and chalk-drawn wickets. Sometimes he forgot his worries. When the game began, his laughter echoing with his friends. But even in cricket, his sharp mind worked differently. He remembered the scores, the averages, the tiniest details of matches played long ago. His friends teased him, saying he had a brain like a scorecard. But Sundar smiled, because numbers were his comfort, his constant companions. Then came a moment that would change everything. His father, after years of saving, managed to bring home something extraordinary. A scooter. It was second-hand, a little worn, but to the family it felt like a symbol of progress. Sundar's eyes sparkled as he touched it. It was not just a machine. It was a sign that with patience and persistence even modest dreams could be reached. And yet, bigger dreams were still far away. The idea of studying in the best universities, of traveling abroad, felt like touching the sky with bare hands. Sundar sometimes wondered if such a path was even meant for boys like him. But life has a way of opening doors at the most unexpected times. One afternoon, as Sundar returned home from school, he saw his mother sitting quietly with a letter in her hand. Her eyes were wet, though she was smiling. He rushed to her side, worried. She handed him the letter. It was from a distant relative who had heard about Sundar's achievements. The letter offered help, a chance to connect Sundar with opportunities far beyond what his family could afford. Lakshmi's hands trembled as she said, "This may be the beginning, Sundar, but you must promise me one thing. No matter where you go, never forget where you came from." That night, Sundar could not sleep. He stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. Was this the door he had been waiting for? Or was it too good to be true? He did not know then that this single letter would set him on a path filled with trials, heartbreak, and triumphs, a path that would carry him from the crowded lanes of Chennai to the bright, sharp world of Silicon Valley. And just as he drifted into sleep, he remembered his mother's words, "Never forget where you came from." Doors opening, doors closing. The morning sun in Chennai rose quietly, slipping through the thin curtains of the pichai home. The light painted, the cement floor in soft orange shades, and for a moment everything felt ordinary. The clinking of steel cups in the kitchen, the sound of a passing bicycle bell outside, the smell of boiling tea. Yet inside Sundar's heart, nothing was ordinary anymore. The letter on the small wooden table seemed to glow brighter than the sun itself. It carried both hope and fear, and Sundar knew his life was about to change. He picked it up slowly, his hands trembling. The words on the page were simple, but they carried weight heavier than iron. The letter spoke of opportunities, of programs and scholarships that might one day allow a boy like Sundar to study at universities far beyond India. But there was something else. Tucked inside the folded paper was a small slip. A note that said, in careful handwriting, "Dreams are expensive, but never let that stop you. Help will find its way." Lakshmi stood behind him, her face unreadable. She had already seen it, already felt the storm it carried. Sundar turned to her, his voice soft. "Amma, is this real? Do you think it is possible?" She looked at him, and for a moment, her eyes shone with pride and sadness together. "It is real, Sundar. But remember, every door that opens has a price. Are you ready to walk through it?" In the weeks that followed, life in their small home shifted. Sundar studied harder than ever, poring over books late into the night, his lamp burning until the oil almost ran out. His father encouraged him, reminding him that opportunities were rare and must be seized with both hands. Yet with every new page Sundar read, the family's struggles seemed to grow louder. Fees, applications, the cost of books. Everything added up, like an invisible mountain. Ragunatha's modest salary stretched thin, thinner than ever before. Lakshmi quietly gave up more of her own comforts. She stopped buying bangles even when neighbors teased her for wearing the same plain ones for years. She cut vegetables with careful hands, making meals that seemed bigger than they were. Sundar noticed these things, and each time, the weight of responsibility pressed harder on his shoulders. Sometimes doubt crept into him like an unwelcome shadow. Late at night, he would lie awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, wondering if he was being selfish. Was it fair to let his parents sacrifice so much for his dreams? Was success worth the price of their hunger, their endless struggles? He remembered the faces of his classmates who laughed at him, who said boys like him could never rise above their place. Their voices haunted him, whispering that he would fail, that he would only bring disappointment. One evening, unable to hold his thoughts inside, Sundar spoke to his father. "Appa, Maybe I should stop. Maybe I should just find a small job and help you. I don't want to see Amma give up everything for me." His father looked at him quietly, then shook his head. "No, Sundar. A job can feed us today, but your education can feed generations. Don't give up. Not now. Not when the door has finally opened." Those words stayed with Sundar like a sacred promise, but promises are not without trials. When he entered his college years, the world widened and so did the challenges. The classrooms were larger, the expectations higher, and for the first time, Sundar found himself surrounded by students who came from wealthy, privileged families. They wore crisp clothes, carried expensive pens, spoke English with fluency and confidence. Sundar, with his simple shirts and quiet voice, felt like an outsider. Some students ignored him completely. Others, more cruel, mocked his accent, his silence, his modest background. He carried their words like stones in his chest, heavy and painful. In the hostel, while others shared stories of holidays abroad or weekends at the cinema, Sundar sat with his books, alone. But in loneliness he found strength. He read not just for grades but for knowledge itself. He immersed himself in learning, building a mind that was sharper than any insult thrown his way. And slowly, professors began to notice. They saw his discipline, his ability to solve problems in ways no one else could. One professor told him, "You don't need to speak the loudest to be heard, Sundar. Your work will speak for you." Those words became a shield against the laughter of others. Still, the struggles at home never disappeared. Sundar's parents sent him what little money they could, but often it was not enough. He would skip meals to stretch his allowance, telling others he was not hungry when in truth his stomach ached. Sometimes he felt guilt stronger than hunger, guilt that his dreams demanded so much from his family. Yet, in the middle of all this hardship, a small moment of kindness changed him. One day, as he sat in the library, a fellow student noticed Sundar's worn-out notebook, pages filled with scribbles and sketches of circuits. Without a word, the student handed him a new notebook. "You'll need it," the student said simply. Sundar was stunned. He did not even know the boy's name. That small act of kindness reminded him of his mother's words. Respect is not in wealth but in kindness. But just as doors were opening, another door threatened to close. During his final year, Sundar faced a decision that shook his family. He had been offered a chance to apply for studies abroad, an opportunity that could change everything. But the costs were overwhelming. The application fees alone were more than what his father earned in a month. The thought of travel, of tickets and expenses seemed impossible. When Sundar brought this news home, silence filled the room. His father's face was heavy, his mother's eyes clouded with worry. They all knew what it meant. To chase this dream would require sacrifices they were not sure they could make. That night, Sundar heard his parents whispering when they thought he was asleep. His mother said, "What if we cannot manage? What if he fails and loses everything?" His father replied, "What if he succeeds and changes everything?" Sundar lay awake, tears burning in his eyes. He realized that his family stood at a crossroads, torn between fear and hope. He felt the crushing weight of their sacrifices, the risk that his dreams carried. The next morning, he made a decision. He walked into the small temple near his home, where incense smoke curled into the air and bells rang softly. Standing before the silent deity, he whispered, "If I succeed, it will be for them. If I fail, I will carry the blame alone." And so began the most difficult chapter of his young life. The attempt to step beyond the narrow lanes of Chennai into a world that seemed unreachable. But just as he prepared his papers, just as he thought he had taken his first step into the future, an unexpected letter arrived. This letter did not offer hope. It carried rejection. The climb to Silicon Valley, the letter lay on the table like a wound. Sundar had stared at it until the words blurred into shadows. Rejection. It was short, cold, and final. The scholarship he had hoped for, the one that would have lifted his family's burden and carried him into a future of possibility, was gone. His chest felt hollow. He thought of his mother's tired hands, of his father's long hours in the factory, of the meals skipped so that he could have books. Was this the reward for all their sacrifices? For days he walked in silence. Chennai's heat pressed down like a heavy blanket, the smell of dust and fried snacks filling the streets, but Sundar barely noticed. Each step felt heavier than the last. At night, he lay awake listening to the ceiling fan whirring slowly, its sound reminding him of the endless cycle of life he feared he would never escape. His mother noticed first. She saw how his eyes no longer shone with curiosity, how his voice had grown quiet even at home. One evening, as he sat staring at the cracks in the wall, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Failure is not the end, Sundar," she said softly. "Sometimes it is the door that leads to a better beginning. Maybe this is not your path. Maybe your path is still waiting." Her words were gentle, but Sundar struggled to believe them. He had put everything into that dream, and it had dissolved in a few printed sentences. But fate has a strange way of testing those who refuse to give up. Weeks later, another opportunity arrived. A professor who had admired Sundar's discipline suggested he apply again, this time for a program abroad that demanded even greater courage. The fees were daunting, the risks even larger, but the chance was real. Sundar hesitated, thinking of the rejection still burning in his heart. But his father said, "Doors open for those who keep knocking. Try again, son. This time, knock harder." And so he did. Sundar applied to Stanford University, in America. When the acceptance came, Sundar could hardly breathe. It felt unreal, like a dream too fragile to touch. Yet joy quickly mixed with fear. The cost of the ticket to America was more than his father's entire annual salary. The thought of leaving his family, his country, his world, was terrifying. Lakshmi, however, never hesitated. She sold her small gold chain, the only piece of jewelry she had kept for years. "For your journey," she said simply. Sundar's throat tightened. He knew what that chain meant to her. It was not just metal. It was memory. It was sacrifice. It was love worn around her neck for decades. Now, it was his wings. The day he left, Chennai station was crowded with its usual chaos. Vendors shouting about tea, the smell of samosas rising in the air, children crying as trains roared past. But for Sundar, everything was a blur. He hugged his mother tightly, her sari damp with tears. His father placed a hand on his shoulder and said only, "Make it count." His younger brother looked at him with wide, fearful eyes, as if Sundar was stepping into another universe. When the plane lifted off, Sundar pressed his forehead against the window. The city below grew smaller, the houses shrinking into dots, the ocean stretching wide. He whispered to himself, "I will not forget. I will not fail." America was nothing like Chennai. When he first stepped into the streets of California, the air felt sharp, the sky seemed too wide, and the silence of the roads felt unnatural. Cars glided smoothly, buildings stretched tall, and strangers spoke with accents that twisted English into shapes he struggled to understand. He felt both wonder and loneliness. Wonder at the libraries filled with more books than he had ever seen, the labs with machines he had only read about, loneliness at the empty hostel room, the silence after calls home, the meals eaten alone with unfamiliar food that tasted nothing like his mother's cooking. Money was his greatest enemy. He lived on the edge of poverty, counting every cent, skipping meals, buying only what was absolutely necessary. Sometimes he would eat just one sandwich a day, drinking water to quiet the hunger in his stomach. When friends invited him out, he smiled politely and made excuses, embarrassed to admit he could not afford even a small coffee. At night, when the campus was quiet, Sundar would walk under the tall trees, his hands deep in his pockets, thinking of home. He could hear in his mind the sound of his mother calling him to dinner, the laughter of children in the narrow lanes, the hum of the old scooter his father had bought. Those memories kept him warm when the American nights felt too cold. But struggles were not only financial. Sundar had to fight his own doubts. In classrooms filled with brilliant students from around the world, he often wondered if he belonged. Others spoke confidently, raising their voices, debating professors. Sundar, quiet and careful, often stayed silent. He worried that his English was not smooth enough, that his ideas were not sharp enough. One evening, after a long day of lectures, he sat in the library staring at a blank page. His hands shook with frustration. Maybe they were right, he whispered to himself. Maybe boys like me don't belong here. He thought of quitting, of returning home, of finding a modest job to ease his parents' burdens. But then he remembered the look in his mother's eyes when she gave him her gold chain, the firm touch of his father's hand at the station, the trembling hope in his brother's silence. He could not quit, not after everything they had given up. He picked up his pen and began to write. Slowly, carefully, patiently. The same patience his father had shown when fixing broken circuits. The same resilience his mother had taught him when she stitched old cerise to make them last longer. Life in America tested him constantly, but it also revealed his strength. Small acts of kindness reminded him that even in a foreign land, humanity was not lost. One professor noticed his quiet brilliance and encouraged him. A fellow student seeing Sundar skip meals once shared a simple homemade lunch. Sundar never forgot these gestures. They were reminders that kindness crosses borders, languages, and cultures. Over time, Sundar grew. His silence was no longer weakness but wisdom. His patience became his power. Professors admired his ability to solve problems not with noise but with clarity. Classmates began to respect the boy who listened more than he spoke, who observed deeply before offering words that carried weight. Yet just as he began to find his place, another storm gathered. Money again became a barrier. The cost of continuing. His studies was too high and he feared he would have to abandon everything midway. He wrote letters home, hiding his desperation, not wanting to burden his parents with the truth. But one night, after weeks of doubt, he received a phone call that changed his path forever. The fire inside the empire. The call came on a quiet evening when Sundar was sitting alone at his small desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and notebooks filled with calculations and ideas. The air in his room was heavy with the smell of stale coffee. His mind exhausted from balancing his studies with the endless worry of finances. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. When he picked it up, the voice on the other end was calm, professional, yet filled with a weight that would alter his destiny. "We're calling from Google," the voice said. For a moment, Sundar thought he had misheard. Google, the company that had already begun reshaping the way people search for knowledge. The company whose very name meant curiosity, possibility, and the future. His heart raced. The voice continued, explaining that they were impressed with his background, his work, and they wanted to meet him. Sundar's hands trembled as he placed the receiver back down. In that small room with peeling paint on the walls and the loneliness of a foreign land pressing down on him, he whispered to himself, "Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the reason I came all this way." The first day at Google felt like stepping into another universe. The offices were nothing like the modest classrooms of Chennai or even the serious, hushed halls of Stanford. The Google campus was alive, buzzing with energy. Bright colors on the walls, open spaces filled with laughter, free food in the cafeterias, and bikes scattered around for employees to ride. To Sundar, it felt almost unreal, like walking into a playground for adults who also happened to be some of the smartest minds in the world. But beneath the playful surface, Sundar quickly learned there was fire. Ambition burned in every corner. People spoke fast. Ideas flew like arrows, and competition was fierce. Everyone wanted to be heard, to be seen, to leave their mark on the world through lines of code, through designs, through innovation. For a man like Sundar, quiet and observant, this world was both inspiring and intimidating. While others raised their voices in meetings, pushing their ideas forward with confidence, Sundar often sat back, listening, analyzing, watching. Some mistook his silence for weakness. They thought he lacked the aggression needed to thrive in Silicon Valley. What they did not realize was that Sundar's silence was not emptiness. It was preparation. Every time he listened, he was learning, gathering, shaping his thoughts with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime watching, waiting, enduring. His first major project was to work on Google Toolbar. At that time, It seemed like a small tool, a way for people to search directly from their browsers. Many within Google did not see it as revolutionary. Some even dismissed it as unnecessary. But Sundar saw differently. He understood that the toolbar was not just a feature. It was a bridge, a way to bring Google closer to people, to make searching easier, faster, more natural. He poured himself into the work, spending long nights in the office, his desk lit by the glow of his computer screen while the rest of the building emptied. He thought of his father fixing circuits in dim light, of his mother stitching clothes late into the night, and he worked with the same quiet determination. Slowly, the toolbar grew. Millions began to use it. People realized they did not need to open the Google homepage to search. They could do it directly from their browser. And for the first time, Sundar's quiet vision began to shine. But success is never without shadows. Others in the company began to notice him. Some admired his calm leadership, but others, threatened by his rise, whispered that he was too soft, too humble, that he lacked the sharp edges needed to climb higher. Sundar heard these whispers, just as he had heard the laughter of classmates in his childhood. Once again, he chose silence. Once again, he let his work speak louder than his words. The real test came with Google Chrome. At that time, Internet Explorer dominated the world. Many thought it was impossible to challenge. Some within Google itself were hesitant, arguing that creating a browser was too risky, too costly, and unnecessary. In meetings, voices rose, arguments clashed, and doubts filled the air. Sundar, however, saw the future. He believed that the browser was the window to the Internet, and that controlling this window was the key to shaping how billions would experience the web. When he finally spoke, his words were calm but firm. If we don't build a browser, someone else will. The Internet deserves better. His proposal was met with resistance. Some laughed, others argued fiercely against him. But Sundar did not back down. He reminded them of Google's mission, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. How can we do that, he asked, if we don't control the window through which people see it? His quiet conviction began to turn heads. Slowly he gathered a small team, people who believed in his vision. Together they worked in secrecy, building Chrome from scratch. They faced countless failures, crashes, bugs, endless nights of frustration. Sundar, however, never raised his voice. When things went wrong, he did not shout or blame. Instead, he sat with his team, listened, and guided them patiently toward solutions. When Chrome finally launched, it was faster, cleaner, and more reliable than anything before it. Users loved it. The browser that many within Google had doubted quickly grew into one of the most widely used in the world. Chrome was not just a product. It was proof that Sundar's quiet strength could move mountains. Yet with success came new challenges. Politics inside Google grew sharper. Powerful voices clashed, egos collided. Sundar found himself in meetings where decisions were not about ideas but about influence. He disliked these battles, but he knew they were unavoidable. In such moments, he leaned on the values his parents had given him: humility, patience, kindness. One day, after a particularly heated debate about the future of Android, Sundar sat alone in his office. Outside, the campus buzzed with energy, but inside he felt the old weight of doubt return. Was he too soft for this world? Could kindness survive in an empire built on competition? As he sat in silence, he remembered his mother's voice. Respect is not in what you own but in how you treat people. He realized that his way, the quiet way, the respectful way, was not weakness. It was his strength. And if the world of Silicon Valley had never seen such leadership, then perhaps it was time they did. The turning point came when he was called into a private meeting with Larry Page, one of Google's founders. The corridors leading to that room seemed longer than usual, his footsteps echoing as if the walls themselves were watching. Inside, the room was quiet, filled with the weight of decisions that shaped the future of technology. Larry looked at him with calm eyes and asked, "Sundar, do you believe you're ready to take more responsibility? Do you believe you can carry, not just projects, but the company itself?" Sundar's heart pounded. He thought of his father's words about patience, of his mother's sacrifices, of the rejection letter that once broke him, of the nights spent hungry but determined. He thought of the boy from Chennai who counted minutes, who dreamed quietly but refused to quit. He looked at Larry Page and answered simply, "I don't need to be the loudest voice. I just need to do what is right." The question that rewrote history. The night before the nation paused, Sundar sat alone in his California home, looking out at the endless glow of city lights. The glass walls reflected his face, older now, lined with the marks of battles fought silently, but still carrying the same quiet eyes of the boy who once counted minutes in a small apartment in Chennai. He had walked corridors where decisions shaped the internet itself. He had faced rivalries and doubts, and he had carried victories that changed how billions lived their daily lives. Yet even as he stood at the peak of power, he thought often of home, the smell of his mother's cooking, the call of vendors in the narrow lanes, the whirring of an old ceiling fan. The weight of leadership was immense. Every decision he made rippled through the world, touching strangers he would never meet. But Sundar remained steady, never forgetting the voice of his mother telling him that respect was not in wealth, not in titles, but in how one treated others. It was this voice that steadied him in moments of chaos when others shouted and demanded, and Sundar quietly chose patience over pride. But far away in India, something else was happening. The Prime Minister had decided to speak to the nation. Millions tuned in, expecting the usual matters of economy, politics, and promises. They did not know that the heart of his speech would stop halfway, not because of forgetfulness, not because of error, but because a thought had struck him so deeply that he could not go on without giving it voice. The pause stretched across the country. People leaned closer to radios, television screens flickered in living rooms and tea stalls, and silence spread from the largest cities to the smallest villages. And then, with a quiet weight, the Prime Minister asked, "Lakshmi Pichai, how did you raise a son like Sundar?" In that single question lay generations of sacrifice, the story of countless mothers who gave up their own dreams so their children could chase bigger ones. It was not only about Sundar. It was about the millions of families who lived with dignity, even in struggle, who believed in education even when they could not afford it, who whispered to their children at night, "You can be more than me."